So today we are talking about the Ukraine religion that is very diverse, I would say. Why? Because Ukraine, as you know, is lying in between the Eastern and Western civilizations. And throughout the history of Ukraine, we always had this, let's say, the conflict of values partially and the conflict of religions that made the influence on our society. And here there is a small, the quick citation of Zelensky about the comment about the war, because now a lot of churches are also bombarded, not only, uh, let's say, infrastructure, that you will never be able to destroy our profound faith in Ukraine and God. So here is some information about the religious diversity in Ukraine overall. Here you see that most of the people in Ukraine are Orthodox, though the problem that we don't have just the Orthodoxy. We have three types of Orthodoxy in Ukraine, and we will speak about it a bit later. We also have the so-called Greek Catholics, that is a mix of Latin Catholics and Orthodox, which is also something to be discussed later. We also have people that believe in Allah, following Islam, Jewish, that now represent only half percent of population, though before the Second World War they accounted for 15% of the population. Some people, they define themselves as just Christians and or Protestants, and we also have people who they say that they are agnostics or just atheists. And among the young people between 16 24 years, there are 50% of people, or 50% of, let's say, youngsters who say that they are not believers. So things are changing. There are mainly older population who believe in God, but I think that during the war, even non-believers started to hope for God, because there is no much of other sources of hope for us apart from the God and our army. So speaking about the religion is that we have how the religion came to Ukraine and where it started. So as I said, that we are mainly Christians, so mainly Orthodox, and it came with the Andrew the Apostle. At least it was mentioned like this in the book of the historical books from the 4th century. There was the Andrew the Apostle who came to preach to Scythians who lived in Ukraine at this period. And there were first Christians there, though they, of course, not all of them converted to Christianity, and the paganism actually thrived in Ukraine, I mean, in today's Ukraine, starting from the 5th century. So this paganism was actually close to the let's say Greek or Roman paganism, when you have the main god like Zeus. So we had the Svarog, and the other gods, the pantheon of gods, for example, the goddess of beauty, the goddess of hunting, and so on. It actually was the native religion to Ukrainians, who actually formed the country that was called the Kievan Rus later in the 8th, 9th centuries. And this country, Kievan Rus, started from today's Ukraine and finished at the borders of the Baltic Sea. So it was quite vast, and it was the country that had the major influence on the Western and Eastern civilizations again, because through Kiev and Rus, many trade roads like Silk Road or the road from north to Byzantine was passing. So being such an important country, trade country at this period, was also economically important to grow. And the problem was that at this period, the pagan country has been seen badly, and some of the traders even decided not to go through Kiev and Rus and to find some other ways through Byzantine, for example. Why? Because a lot of traders prefer to avoid going to the pagan countries and dealing with pagan countries. So the Kiev and Rus governance, understanding this, started adopting Christianism with the first, let's say, prince of Kiev and Rus adopting Orthodoxy. Sorry, at that time there was no Orthodoxy. Christianism in 860, Prince Askold. But people still in Ukraine, people in Kiev and Rus, were still reluctant to get the Christianity, because there was something. I mean, they believed all of their life and the generations before in some pagan gods, so it was not that easy. It was only in 988 when Prince Volodymyr the Great baptized the Kiev and Rus after the series of revolts. And today he is seen as a saint, Volodymyr the Great. You can even see the icon of Volodymyr the Great in St. Peter's Cathedral in Vatican. And also you can understand that the name Volodymyr started being, let's say, popular in Ukraine, and not only. So you see the President Vladimir Putin and the President Volodymyr Zelensky, both of them having this name that actually can be translated as owner of the world. So I think that Putin tries to, let's say, tries to really maybe believe so much in his name that he really tries to become the owner of at least the ex-Soviet world. But I don't think that the Volodymyr the Great would be happy of this, let's say. So from 988, Ukraine is officially the Christian country, though the bishop who baptized Ukraine was from Byzantine Empire, from Constantinople. And in 1054, the Christian church officially split into Catholic and East Orthodox churches. So I'm not sure if you aware of all of the differences between Catholic and Orthodox churches. But for you, the main shall be two. First, in a Catholic church, there is the Pope at the head of the church, and he's like the second after the Apostle Peter. And he's infallible, of course, and he's over the emperors. During the history, he was normally over the emperors, as he's the ambassador of God in this world. While for the Orthodox, they just have the main patriarch that is sitting in Constantinople, which is today's Istanbul, who is not officially infallible, who may sin, of course, who is just human being, and he's more like the spiritual guide rather than the head of the church. Instead, each country, more or less, who is the Orthodox country, has its own patriarch, his own head of church, and this head of church is kind of independent from the one in Constantinople. But from another point of view, the emperor or the president or the governor of the country is above the patriarch. So there is not much of secularism here. Let's put it in the other words. So this kind of question is more about the organization of the church. From the theological point of view, there are other differences, but the main one is when for those who are Christians, they know there is the credo, so called the creed, and there is the moment when the creed in the Catholic Church says that the Holy Spirit comes from both the Father and the Son, while the Orthodox Church says that the Holy Spirit comes only from the Father. So it was kind of the main theological point, Philoque, why the churches split in 1054. Considering that Ukraine has been baptized by the Byzantine bishop, the bishop from Constantinople, automatically Kievan Rus became the Orthodox country after 1054. It continued until the Golden Horde invasion by Mongol Tatars, when the Kievan Rus actually stopped existing as it was before. It shrinked, and Kievan Rus became what is now the Western Ukraine only. But instead, there emerged the Lithuanian Rus Commonwealth together with Golden Horde Khanate, which later, after in 15th century, became the Crimean Khanate. And the Crimean Khanate is the Tatar state, and it's where the Tatars in Ukraine come from 15th century, after the Golden Horde, after the end of Golden Horde, let's say. What means that we started having the Crimean Khanate? It means that we started having the Islam in the territory of nowadays Ukraine. So from the 1st century until the 13th century, you see that we came from paganism through Christianity, then Orthodoxy, to actually welcoming also the Islam in the territory of southern Ukraine. Do you have any questions at this moment? Okay,
No,
so I will.
it's clear.
Okay, so I will continue with my timeline. After that, so we already mentioned the Orthodoxy, but in the 16th century, the Lithuanian Rus Commonwealth is uniting with Poland, Rzeczpospolita, it was called like this. And Lithuania at this period was actually the pagan country. Still, so Rus was Orthodox, and then we have the Polish that were Catholic. And the problem was that at this moment they were ultra Catholic, and because it was a moment of counter-reformation, when there was the moment of conservatism in Catholic Church, and what kind of influence it had on Ukraine at this moment is that the king, the Polish king, started persecuting Orthodox people and especially Orthodox priests. So after some period, the Orthodox decided to propose the so-called Union Church, which is the mix of Catholic and Orthodox Church, which is today called Greek Catholic Church. This union has been signed in 1996, 96, sorry. And this church exists today. How it exists, it adopted the Orthodox ritual, but the Pope is at the head of the church, okay? And again, in the creed, the Greek Catholics, and I'm, by the way, Greek Catholic, we are reading that the Holy Spirit comes from the Father and the Son. So in these kind of theological, let's say, discrepancies, Greek Catholics are more like Catholics, but in the same time, they are following the Orthodox ritual. And for example, we are celebrating the Christmas with the Orthodox, the 7th of January. Also, the priest in Orthodox Church can get married and can have kids. So it's the same for the Greek Catholic Church. So it's kind of the mix of two, more Orthodox in the ritual, but the cardinal, the head of Greek Catholic Church, is the cardinal of Roman Catholic Church, okay? And when there is the election of the Pope, so the Greek Catholic, the head of Greek Catholics is taking part in the elections. It's kind of the mix, and it still exists until today. In 17th century, there was kind of the revolt of Ukrainians, especially the Cossacks, that emerged in the central Ukraine at this moment. The revolt against Polish rule. This revolt was successful, though very bloody, honestly speaking. And this revolt gave the kind of independence to the nowadays central and northern Ukraine. The problem was that at this moment, the head of the Cossacks and the head of this new country that was called Hetmanshchina, so Bogdan Khmelnytsky, he was looking for some alliances, and they turned to Russia, to Russian Empire that at this moment was actually called Moscow country, because they believe that they are Orthodox. So if they are Orthodox, they are closer to Cossacks and closer to our beliefs. So of course they will also help this new country, this new Ukrainian country that was called Hetmanshchina, to let's say to have some defense against the same Polish rule. The problem is that after this Pereyaslav agreement that actually cemented this alliance between Cossacks and Moscow Tsar, the Moscow started seeing this agreement more that they can annex and occupy Ukraine. And that's what they actually done with Catherine II. Catherine II occupied all Ukraine except of some part of Western Ukraine. Started calling it Small Russia, this part. And at this moment, Ukraine as a country for 300 years stopped existing, let's say on the paper officially. In the same time, Catherine II was kind of quite racist against Jewish people, and that was okay for her until Russia annexed Ukraine. Why? Because there were no Jewish in Russia at this moment, though there were many Jewish in today's Ukraine, Lithuania, and Belarus. So what did she do? She made a Pale of Settlement. She said that the Jewish can live only at the border of Russian Empire, only at the western border of Russian Empire. And the moment there was some small immigration of Jewish into Russian Empire, immediately they were sent to the what is today Ukraine and Belarus. That's why later, in 20th century, the very considerable part of Ukraine was made of Jews. In the same time, there was a new branch of Judaism emerging in Ukraine, which is called Hasidic Judaism. That is a bit of like radical Judaism, a little bit, because it's a mix combining of some esoteric secrets with in-depth Torah scholarship. So they are nowadays called Orthodox Jews. And this Hasidic Judaism continues as thriving, and now the center of Hasidic Judaism is actually in Ukraine, in the city called Uman. And every year there is the festival with 40,000 Jews coming from all around the world, especially from Israel. And it's kind of like the pilgrimage of Jews, of Orthodox Jews in Ukraine. Though last year it was a little bit interrupted by COVID, because Israel put a very strict laws on who can leave the country and have to come back. And yet it gathered around 20,000 Jews again. I don't know how it's going to be this year. It depends on the outcomes of the war. So here we come from the 16th century until 18th century. We see that Ukraine started being closer to the Catholic Church. There was the Greek Catholic Church as the unique, let's say, establishment, the religious establishment emerged that still in life today. There was the Hasidic Judaism as the new branch of Judaism emerging as well. And in the same time, Ukraine opted to be closer to Russia, seeking for the alliances and help from Russia that actually turned to be bad, and turned into ruin for the Ukrainian society for many years, for 3 centuries. We end up with the first annexation of Crimea. So you remember in the previous slide, I already mentioned the Tatars who lived in the south of Ukraine, and especially with the center in Crimea. They had their country, which was called Crimean Khanate. And in 1783, Catherine II annexed also Crimea, putting the end to the Crimean Khanate and the country of Tatars at this point. So now we are going to the 20th century, where in 1917, as you remember, it was the October Revolution and so on. But after the revolution, there were some states emerged, like the Ukrainian National Republic. There was also, by the way, Crimean National Republic emerged. So we had the war against Bolshevik, the war against Stalin. Poland, for example, won this war. Ukraine did not win, so which ended up being the part of Soviet Union after. But before the Soviet Union, for these 1-2 years, Ukraine, having the independent country, also proclaimed the Ukrainian Patriarchate, so Ukrainian Orthodox Church. As I told you, in Orthodox Church, each country has its own patriarch. So in 1919, we created such patriarchate. They didn't last a long time because Soviet Union actually tried to eliminate religion, and it was important that the only religion during the communist era was communism. Of course, there is no God, there is only communism, maybe Lenin. Uh, so and this utopia about the communism in 70 years was kind of the only belief that people could have at this point. And a lot of churches have been converted into, for example, places for horses or the warehouses, things like that. It was like this until probably 80s, but we see that in 40s there was a very bad thing happening to the world, the Nazi invasion. And as I told you before, the Second World War, where around 15% of Ukrainian population were Jews. During the war, 70% of them were killed. Unfortunately, now there are of course, the cemeteries all around Ukraine, the Jewish cemeteries, but it was devastating. The synagogues, I think most of the cities and even villages had at least one synagogue, but they were mainly destroyed. And after the Second World War, around 700,000 Jews were still living in the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. However, then Israel as a country has been proclaimed, and a lot of Jews left Israel, left Soviet Union and Ukraine included for Israel. That's why today we count only, I think that the Jewish count only for 0.5% of the population. Though you know that our president is Jew, so they are kind of prominent. Even the main opponent of, but the head of the opposition is also Jew, Rabinovich. So they're kind of prominent in our society. In 1944, there was also another bad, stain in the Ukrainian history, is that the Crimean Tatars were deported from Crimea to today's Uzbekistan. Why? Because Stalin somehow baseless accused them of collaboration with Nazi. It was totally baseless. I think he just wanted to make the purge and to do the ethnical purge. So they were in thousands, mainly women and kids, because a lot of men were killed during the Second World War. They were all deported in Uzbekistan. And if you remember in 2016, the Eurovision, in case you're watching it, there was a Ukrainian singer, Jamala, with her song 1944, winning the Eurovision. She was singing exactly about what happened during this year. And by the way, she's Tatar. Today, Tatars, but since 2014, Tatars are very pro-Ukrainian, and those who stay in Crimea, they try to have some resistance against Russian annexation and Russian occupation, because even today they are not very well welcomed by the Russians in Crimea. In 91, there was the end of Soviet Union. That was the end for everyone, but probably not for Putin. And there was the revival of the churches in Ukraine, because recall that the churches were actually officially forbidden in the Soviet era. And so after 91, there was the resurrection, let's say, of Greek Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches. Though, as I mentioned already, in 1919, we created our Kievan Patriarchate, and together with Moscow Patriarchate that had the influence in Ukraine. What does it mean? It means that around all of the Orthodox churches in Ukraine, if you take all of them, there would be 50% of them the Orthodox churches of Kievan Patriarchate, and 50% of Moscow Patriarchate. What is the difference? The difference is that there are two main differences. First is who is the head of the church, and secondly, there are some differences in the ritual. For example, the liturgy in the Moscow Orthodox Church goes up to 4 hours on Sunday morning, while for the Kievan liturgy, it's gonna continue for maximum 2 hours, let's say. So there are some small changes in the rituals also. So it was not that much important for Ukrainian society actually, because of course most of the people could understand that of course there is some influence of Moscow through the Moscow Patriarchate on Ukrainians also, but no one spoke about the war at this moment, and actually in general the religions are quite tolerated in Ukraine by Ukrainians. There are also a lot of Protestants since 91 in Ukraine. It was until 2014, and until in 2014, the Moscow churches, they started saying that the annexation of Crimea was the right thing, that Donbass, that they have a right to become independent and then maybe become the part of Russia, that we are not gonna pray for those people who, and especially soldiers who died during the Donbass war since 2014. So it made a lot of people turn from the churches of the Moscow Patriarchate to Kiev Patriarchate. And then it culminated in the so-called Tomos of autocephaly given to Kiev by the Constantinople, that officially recognized Ukrainian church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as independent from Moscow rule. Okay, so it's one of the 15 now independent Orthodox churches recognized by Constantinople. So here we see that starting from 91, we start having kind of the diversity in Ukrainian society, because religious diversity, because there's already Greek Catholics that are mainly in Western Ukraine, and then we have Ukraine Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. They call it like this. Orthodox Church of Ukraine is of Kiev Patriarchate, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is of Moscow Patriarchate. There is slight difference in just changing the wordings, let's say. Together with the Protestants, because there was the wave of especially from the American society with different Protestant churches, and of course we are keeping the synagogues. Let's say there are still 70 synagogues working in Ukraine for those quantity of Jews left, and there are 160 mosques for the Tatars and other Muslim people in our country. So here is kind of short, I don't know how short it was actually, a presentation of what actually happened in Ukraine since 2000 years ago, and how we ended up with different churches within Christian church, let's say, together with some other religions. With the full-scale invasion of from February 24, I call it full-scale invasion because by our standards, the war started in 2014 actually, because 14,000 people officially died since 2014 for the battles in Donbass. So since February 24, a lot of churches have been destroyed and bombarded. And by the way, most of them are churches under the Moscow rule. Here you see one of the comparison before and after, and here I just gave some links where you can see more information. Not sure if they are 100% up to date. Some of them is from 11th of March, but you will see the destruction of the churches. Nothing stands before the bombardment. The interesting thing, and don't know if you are aware of it, is about the military chaplains. Do you know about what is the mission of the military chaplains?
I don't know. I would be very curious to learn about them.
Okay, so here I give kind of the definition. So chaplains are not just the priests; they're kind of the priest, but they are military priests. It means that they are standing with the military regiment all of the time. So where the military regiment goes, changes its position, it must stay with them. So they make kind of like the church inside of the regiment. So they must, let's say, do all of the rituals which are necessary. For example, if someone wants to have the confession, or someone even died, let's say, here you have the priest who must conduct all of the rituals. But it's more than this. Military chaplains, or kind of military priests, are those who kind of support and try to keep the moral among the soldiers, who try to speak always about the humanity, and who try to support. Maybe I know some of them. One of my neighbors is one of the chaplains, and he says that it's important to, in the evening when we have the dinner, to speak about God, and to speak about the hope, and to speak that we see that, for example, atrocities made by Russian soldiers, but we shall not be like this. It's important that we shall be about this, and because it's important to keep the humanity and to keep the values. And what is interesting is that now there are a lot of chaplains. Officially, there were 700 before the war. Maybe now there are more. They are part of the Ukrainian army since 2021. They officially recognized as the part of Ukrainian army, which means that they are paid. They have the salaries. And the chaplains usually, wherever they are, Catholics, Greek Catholics, Muslims, they must, as it's mentioned here, they must minister to all faiths. So they must not say, okay, let's pray to the Orthodox God, or things like that. They must not mention these differences in the church. They must just, let's say, speak about God rather than speak about how shall we believe in God. Okay. That's why among the chaplains today, they are not only Orthodox, they are imams, and you see one of them here on the slide. It's one of the Muslim imam who is now the chaplain in one of the military regiments. They are also rabbi. There are not many rabbis actually, but there are many also Catholics, by the way. So it's something that is very important, but it's very risky. It's very risky. So even for the priest, considering that the priests today in Ukraine, most of them, they have the wives and the kids and the families. For them to go and maybe risk to be killed or just step on the mine, it's also kind of the heroism from my point of view, but it's necessary. It's necessary from the psychological point of view for the soldiers. They need to have some faith and especially some hope when they are in the battle, or after the battle, or before the battle, of course. Here I also want to mention the reactions from the religious leaders in Ukraine, and not only. So the chief rabbi, the head of Jewish church, let's say, churches in Ukraine, they accused Putin of committing the war crimes. And he added, against whom is this denazification directed? Against Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish, or against opposition leader, who is Rabinovich? Whom are you calling the Nazi? Here I give the quote of actually the Imam from Egypt, the head of Sunnis, because the Tatars are Sunnis, who also is calling against the war and for the peace talks. The Archbishop Shevchuk is the head of Greek Catholics, calls the aggression against Ukraine a war of total destruction. The same idea have the Kiev Patriarch, the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And now what's happening about Moscow Patriarchate and what's their point of view on the war in Ukraine? It was interesting to see that there was actually the clash because Kirill, who is sitting in Moscow and who is the head of the heads, let's say, he justified and he keeps justifying the war, saying that it's important because for me it's just ridiculous because the West was imposing secularism, and I think secularism is something good, on Ukraine and imposing the idea to accept gay pride parades. So imagine that he justifies killing kids, distracting cities because of the gay pride parades. For me, it's surely not Christian point of view, and it shows how much Kirill is actually working on Putin. And he also mentions that it's a little bit about the religious war because, of course, Moscow Patriarchate did not recognize the autocephaly, the independence of Kiev Patriarchate, given by Constantinople, by Istanbul in 2018. They also don't recognize Catholics or Greek Catholics. So that's why Kirill is invoking a little bit, also hinting about that there is a part of religious war in what's happening now between Russia and Ukraine. From the another point of view, he's the Onufri is a bishop of Kiev from Moscow Patriarchate. The first day of the war said that such a war has no excuse, neither from God nor from people. So within you, we see that already within the Moscow Patriarchate, after what kind of things Kirill is speaking about, even within the Moscow Patriarchate Church, there is a split. There is a real split. And it's not only about Ukraine, because as far as I know, there are many churches in Moscow Patriarchate that either within the last month converted to Kiev Patriarchate or just don't mention Kirill within the liturgy as they are obliged, and they are thinking about maybe even making some other let's say autonomous church within Moscow Patriarchate, but in any case they are not, I would say most of them are not, they don't agree with what Kirill said, and they don't just justify the war, though there are still some churches and some Moscow Patriarchate priests in Ukraine that help the Russian soldiers, and that even let's say make the churches as the kind of military bases for the Russian soldiers, which is unacceptable from the Christian point of view. So I also know that other Moscow Patriarchate churches within Europe, like for example in Amsterdam, they turned against Kirill as well. They don't mention him in during their liturgies, and they also don't know how to accept what Kirill is saying. So who knows? Maybe soon we will see some also changes in the Moscow Orthodox Church as well. I hope so, because I wouldn't like church to be so much against the gay pride parades, let's say. So my last slide is about, again, the religion in Ukraine. So here you see the Ukrainian Council of Churches, the picture of them, I think from 2020, when there was one of the meeting of the Ukrainian Council of Churches, where you see people all together. You see, of course, you cannot recognize, but here there is the head of Greek Catholic Church. There is the head of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the Kievan Patriarchate, the Moscow Patriarchate, the Catholic Church. There should be the imam here, but I don't know him, so I cannot recognize. You see the representative of Jews, and the rest are representatives of the Protestant Church. So in general, this picture shows that the religious, if there is a peace and everyone really wants the peace, it doesn't matter to which church you are going to until this church is actually for the peace and doesn't preach, let's say, against democratic and normal values of the society. And we hope that it will be like this, but with the war and the comments of Kirill, I don't know how the church is gonna continue after the war. So thank you for the listening, and if you have any questions, I will try to answer.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
It was very interesting, because I thought I knew something, but I've discovered a lot of things. Thank you very much.
Yeah, me too. I learned a lot of things tonight, and there are many topics that I really appreciate.
Thank you, and thank you for listening. It's kind of complicated, but okay. Religion, from my point of view, religion is always complicated.
You made it very clear for us to understand.
Yes, we didn't find it complicated in the way you explained.
Oh, thank you. That's important for me.
I have a question regarding secularism. So we could see that in Moscow, in Russia, the church is quite close to the government. But how is it since 2018 in Ukraine, since there was this independence of the head of church of Orthodox Church in Ukraine?
So even before officially the church and the governance are must be independent, and the church shall be independent from the governing of the country. From another point of view, in the church, they are praying for Ukraine or things like that. And of course, some presidents, they like to go to the church for Easter and to be filmed, let's say, showing that there, you see, I'm a kind of Orthodox. For example, like Yanukovych, he was always in Moscow Patriarchate Church. Then Poroshenko, the previous president, he was usually in Kiev Patriarchate Church. And then we have Zelensky, whom we don't see in any of the churches, and we are all right with it. I think that this diversity of churches helps actually to put churches aside from the politics. So, and I think it's the best.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, very good.
Thank you.
Do you know whether in Russia they have those, how did you call them, those priests in the army?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think there are any. Because I've never seen in any news.
Mhm.
Even in Ukraine, they started being the part of the army only from last year, and before they were
Uh-huh.
officially the volunteers.
Mhm. Yeah, because you have something like that in France,
Yeah,
but we never talk about that. But you have something similar in France, or you have in the prisons. You have something
in the
like that
prisons.
also. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It's very difficult to. It's very difficult to be a chaplain because you
Mhm.
are seeing people dying every day in your eyes, and you try to, let's say, pop up the moral,
Mhm. Mhm.
give some hope, but speak about sometimes some soldiers that I know told me that it was important not just to have like a hope, but just to sometimes to change the topic. Okay, sometimes to speak about something that is out of this of the like of these earthy problems. Let's say to speak about something higher ideas, yes, about the Bible, what the Bible preaches, something totally different. And I think it's something very important.
Mhm. I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that is part of why the morale of the Ukrainian soldier is very high, much higher than the Russians.
Yeah, and it was also interesting for me to learn from the chaplains and also from other sources that you shall not speak about the faith, I mean the church you are in. You shall be like universal. You shall speak even if you're imam, you just shall uh, just mention
Mhm.
the God, and that's it, and speak just in general as much as it's possible.
It's really great.
Yeah, that's it's not easy, by the way, as well. You need also to, it's important to be not radical, let's say.
Yes.
That's
um,
Try with Kirill.
the chaplain.
That's the
Try
true
with Kirill.
spirituality, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, Svitana. I don't know whether other people have questions, but it was
It
very
was really
clear.
impressive, interesting,
Mhm.
Yes.
and like so many details are so intermingled with the history of Ukraine. It's very interesting and so diverse.
Yeah, it's
Different
better.
religions. For me, maybe the question of Islam religion. Did you say that now it's like 0.5% of people are Islam?
Also, both Islam and Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
The Jews, as I told you, they were either killed or a lot of them went to Israel. Most of them
Mm-hmm.
after the Second World War, who survived, and the Tatars. They were deported to Uzbekistan, and they were mainly the source. Let's say not the source. They are mainly the Muslims in Ukraine. A lot of them were deported, and not all of them came back from Uzbekistan in 90s. And though they live not only in Crimea, where I used to study in Ternopil, we had the students from Tatar, who are Tatars. What is interesting about Tatars is that they try to keep let's say their ethnicity. So it's kind of common that Tatars will marry another Tatar. And like this, they can continue because now there are, I don't know, I cannot tell you how many thousands of Tatars will have, but surely less than 1 million. And there are 200,000 Tatars, which live mainly in Crimea. Now they are annexed, they live in annexed Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
And I know
I
they're
have a
not very
linking
happy.
question. Mm-hmm. I have a linking question, if I may, please, because the diversity is like so impressive. And I'm from Slovakia, which is just next to you, and I can say that in Slovakia, Poland, even in Czech Republic, the church is, the influence of church has been growing recently, and the church has been bringing this very conservative discourse into public life. And even somehow it looks like the church, the nationalism, and even like the ideas which are close to this propaganda webs are linked. You know, like church is not playing a positive part in the society, and it has been growing strong. So instead of solving some real issues in society, we are discussing the gay rights, and you know, and that's the church in the parliament. So I wanted to ask whether there was this kind of tendency before the war in Ukraine, or what was the position really?
I tell you. So I think there was an attempt because in Poland recently we see the influence of conservatism, of a bit radical view of Catholic faith about the women, let's say, abortion rights. And there was some, I remember 2-3 years ago, some Greek Catholic priests, not all of them, it was not on the official level, let's say, but some of them, they united to propose actually anti-abortion law, which was actually immediately, how to say it, forgotten in history, because first of all, we have other problems, much more important, let's say. And secondly, I think it's partially, though I don't like Soviet Union, okay, but it's partially thanks to Soviet Union that people believe in God, and people believe in some in God, but also from a bit liberal point of view, at least towards women. So the abortion rights were allowed since the beginning of 20th century in Ukraine. And for people, you know, to think that, okay, now church tells us that it's bad. I mean, maybe it's bad, but we don't actually want to change it. Let's put it like this. So so I don't think the church has that much of influence. I mean, these radical views of some church clergy have such an important influence on Ukrainian society, actually, fortunately.
Okay, thank you.